Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces.
When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artist, which gives a painting its context. But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail. This week we're by the seaside in Brighton, visiting one of Britain's very first public art galleries.
We're looking at two paintings of religious subjects. 2 for 1 special offer. The names of the artists who painted them are shrouded in mystery, but I've got a hunch who might have been responsible.
I'll be visiting Brighton's Royal Pavilion, the most extravagant monument to excess ever created by a British monarch. Gosh, then the mind boggles to think what the whole room might have cost.
Our pictures both show important characters from the life of Christ, and we reveal how their artistic representations evolved over time.
Biblical experts explain how these accounts were adapted to evoke a specific emotional response from the faithful.
Balthasar, the Black King, had played an absolutely key part in that.
Brighton Museum and Art Gallery's Curator of Fine Arts is Jenny Lund.
Welcome to Brighton Museum.
Hello.
The complex of buildings that comprise the Royal Pavilion, the Dome Concert Hall, and this lovely museum were all built in the early years of the 19th century. This is the first time I've ever visited the museum, and I can't wait to have a good look round.
While Emma sets off to see the sights, I had 2 pictures on my must-see list, and the first one was in the vaults. It's a very popular religious subject, the Penitent Magdalene.
There she is, look.
There she is. I'll leave you to it.
Thank you. Well, on Art UK, this is described as by an unknown artist, but there's something about the technique, and particularly this rather soft, almost smoky handling, which reminds me of an artist, an Italian artist called Francesco Trevisani. Art history has unfortunately rather forgotten about poor old Trevisani, but in the 18th century, he was considered one of the finest painters in Europe, patronised by the usual array of popes and kings. They particularly liked his ability to inject a little bit of Italian sensuousness into religious paintings like this. Mary Magdalene is repenting of her life of sin before she became a follower of Christ, although she's not repented enough to put all her clothes back on. The trick with paintings like this is that you are meant to look at them and feel similarly repentant, but also a little bit titillated at the same time. Now, unfortunately, the painting is in a rather dirty condition, but I'm hoping with a little bit of cleaning, we can get into all sorts of details here. There's obviously a luscious background waiting to come out, and the hands are really beautifully painted. It's really quite exciting. Can't wait to get started.
There's a second picture in the Brighton collection that I wanted to have a look at. It's currently on display in one of the exhibition rooms, but it caught my attention for a very curious reason.
This is King Balthasar, one of the 3 wise men who paid homage to the birth of Christ. He's traditionally shown as an African prince. One of the things that confused me looking at the photograph of this on Art UK is that he seemed to have white hands, although looking at it now, he It may be that he's supposed to be wearing gloves. It's difficult to tell in this condition. I don't often get excited by the legs of a man in a painting, but that's a lovely pair of pins there. A beautiful sense of the light falling on that muscly, rippling thigh muscle. Whoever painted this was really quite good. The picture was bequeathed to Brighton Museum as a work attributed to a minor Flemish painter called Bernard van Orley. But I wonder if it might in fact be a much better-known Flemish artist called Joos van Cleve. Joos van Cleve was one of the top artists working in Antwerp at the beginning of the 16th century. What I find absolutely fascinating about this picture is it would appear to be an extremely early and very accurate representation of a black subject in Western art. It's very frustrating because it's difficult to tell beneath the very old yellow varnish and some layers of overpainted dirt just what we're dealing with here.
I hope these pictures will turn out to be hidden gems, and they have a lot in common. They both show people who play an important role in the life of Jesus, but whose stories are largely invented. In the New Testament, Mary Magdalene was never described as a prostitute, and there are no names or details provided for the three wise men. But if I'm right about who painted them, they're both by artists who were once regarded as the masters of their age.
Over the last 2 centuries, Brighton's Royal Pavilion has fallen in and out of favour. Adored by George IV, who built it, but ransacked and deserted by Victoria, who sold it to the town. George is still keeping an eye on his creation from his perch by the main entrance gate.
He'd first visited the town as a guest of his playboy uncle, the Duke of Cumberland, in 1783.
The modest house he originally purchased was intended to be nothing more than a holiday retreat. In the pavilion's music room, I met curator Alexandra Losk.
It was very important to him that it wasn't called a palace. It was his pleasure pavilion by the sea, and this is what it looked like in the 1780s.
Sober looking in contrast.
And from this, we get over the next 20, 30, 40 years to what we see now, this sort of oriental-looking building. And he introduces this exotic style, Chinese largely, but there's other cultures feeding into this as well.
Would George have had any experience of the other cultures that he was referencing?
Not at all.
George never travelled anywhere more exotic than Hanover. But if he couldn't go to China himself, he could afford to pay for China to come to him. These porcelain pagodas, on loan from the royal collection, were made in China for the pavilion in 1803 and imported by a merchant called Mr. Robert Fogg.
He was a Chinaman. So he supplied George with these things.
Thinking it might have been kind of pricey?
It didn't come cheap. One pagoda, £100, expensive. And there's 6 in this room. Embellishing them cost him £2,000.
Whoa! So if that's the price of the pagodas, the mind boggles. How much would the whole room have cost?
£46,000.
Wow!
Just to put that in context, that's a shade under £4 million in today's money. At the other end of the building, the banqueting room was equally luxurious, with a dramatic dragon in the dome hovering under painted copper palm leaves.
So what would life have been like here? What was the life of the building?
So we have some accounts of the wild parties here and the banquets. This is by a Princess Leven, and she describes in her letters, one spends the evening half lying on cushions. There are perfumes, music, liqueurs. There's something effeminate in it, which is disgusting. Devil take me, I think I must have got into bad company.
My goodness, it's quite
That's
shocking.
quite naughty.
Yeah.
George was succeeded by his brother William IV, and the partying in Brighton continued. In 1837, however, Queen Victoria inherited the throne and the mood changed dramatically. She found the bedrooms in the pavilion small and dark, But it was the building's location that bothered her most. Standing here with the exposure to the street, it really doesn't seem appropriate for a queen.
Yes, and this was the parading ground of Brighton. This is where everybody sort of walked up and down to see and to be seen. And imagine Victoria being here and feeling quite so overlooked. So she really didn't like that.
Did she like Brighton itself?
Not really, to be honest. No, it was, you know, she didn't want to be associated with her rather disreputable uncles. She couldn't really move around here freely. Every time she left the building, people were chasing her. Oh, wow. Both the aristocracy and the hoi polloi. They would all come out and follow her, so she couldn't enjoy a walk on the beach.
After a final visit in 1845, Victoria never returned to Brighton. She stripped the pavilion of its contents, even removing the fireplaces from the walls, and shipped everything to London, where many pieces were used to furnish a new extension to Buckingham Palace. The building was put up for sale. Would you buy a used palace in need of attention from a young queen? In 1850, the town of Brighton coughed up £50,000 from the council's coffers to buy the empty shell of the pavilion. But now the town commissioners found themselves with something of a white elephant, a bogus, pseudo-Indian building with all its finest features missing. What on earth could they do with it?
Meanwhile, in search of any records relating to our paintings, I've come to see Stig Evans, Brighton Museum's picture conservator and custodian of the museum's accession book.
Where's our picture? There, 1954. The Repentant Magdalene. Purchase price £5. Well, that's cheap, isn't it?
Billy Bargain.
It seems our penitent Magdalene has been the subject of a great deal of speculative attribution over the years.
Someone's been through the list of all the suspects trying to work out who painted it. We got Marco Libieri, Pietro Libieri, Carlo Cignani, here's another one, Andrea Vaccaro, influenced by Caravaggio. It's interesting, the name Caravaggio keeps popping up.
Yes.
It's quite a Caravaggesque painting, isn't it? So
It is.
I see every name here apart from Trevisani. Now, what about our Balthazar? Definitely comes in as Bernard van Orley, but then by 1964, the name Joos van Cleve has been attached to it. I'm always reassured when I find I'm not the first person to come up with an explanation. Right. So, Joos van Cleve or Bernard van Orley. Another one with some mystery as to who painted it.
These clues are tantalizing, but throw up more questions than they answer. As ever, the best evidence as to who painted our pictures will come from the paintings themselves.
Brighton Pavilion is not just unique architecturally, it's also one of the few royal residences not owned by the Queen or the British state. When Brighton took possession of the building in 1850, there was no precedent to suggest what to do with a second-hand palace. It's hard to imagine this room at that time. Bare floorboards, the chandeliers gone, plaster showing through where the fireplaces had been. The first use it was put to was as an art gallery. The town's modest art collection was put on display, augmented with works by local artists. It was one of the first public art galleries outside London. By the 1860s, however, Victoria began to send back some of the more significant pieces.
Over the years, many, many things were returned, but what we're looking at now is one of the most important and most beautiful things that were made for this room.
This magnificent chinoiserie clock is one of some 500 objects that have been returned to the pavilion on loan whilst renovations take place in Buckingham Palace.
So around that time, people were reading 1001 Nights. They were reading Kubla Khan, evoking exotic places.
Yeah, there's an absolute coherence between the clock and the rest of the room. It's hard to imagine it anywhere else. The items from the royal collection will be on display for the next 2 years. I wonder if George IV walked back into the pavilion today, he'd spot any differences.
Our art historical odd couple of a fallen woman and a wise man have followed their guiding star to the London studio of our picture restorer, Simon Gillespie.
Hello. Hello. Here we are again. Well, Exhibit A.
This is rather beautiful, isn't it?
Well,
What you can see from it, it's a filthy, dirty picture.
Now, who's it by?
I don't know.
Francesco Trevisani is the name we're playing with.
That's a good name.
Very important Roman painter, late 17th century, early 18th century.
The hands are very beautiful. Very nice detailing in some of the highlights, some of the shadows. And it looks like it's in really nice condition as well.
Yes.
Let's have a look at it in some proper light.
Okay, thank you.
The studio lights reveal just how grubby the paint surface was. And the first task is to apply some mild cleaning solution to start to remove the grime.
Wow.
Lovely. It is in good condition.
The wetted surface revealed Mary Magdalene glowing in a peculiar soft focus way that emphasized the sentimental nature of the picture.
Yes, the tip of the nose is in focus, but the rest is sort of out of focus. Quite a difficult trick to pull off, actually.
Can we see pentiment around here? Look at the way that the hand actually recedes there. All of these half tones are the things that normally are cleaned off. And they've survived incredibly. Let's see the skull.
Oh, lovely. Wow. Trip to the dentist for him. There seems to be some writing on this bookmark there, which I'm hoping might be a signature beginning with T.
It's a very prominent bookmark, isn't it? It's right in the middle of the picture. Yeah, it looks like there is some writing, or the remains of some writing.
So far, so good as far as the penitent Magdalene is concerned. But it's time to turn our attention to our other picture.
Lovely. I'm very excited about this one, actually. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Look at that, that's spectacular.
It's a rarity.
What have we got? We've got Balthazar, the Moorish king, Bernard van Orly.
Yes, one of the three wise men. You, me, and him. But actually, Use van Cleve is the artist name we're working with.
Is it? Right, okay.
I'm not sure Bernard van Orly is right.
But Use van Cleve is a great name. So we've got a nice picture to deal with. Let's get some light on it. I'm noticing straight away that there's this strange shape on the top, which has got...
Yes, there is, yes.
You see the reflections there?
Oh,
it's got a serpentine shape. What does that remind you of?
Yeah, a triptych wing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
One of the doors.
Yes, how interesting. So someone has tried to make this into a single picture and added that.
Yes.
Beautiful head, don't you think?
The face is amazing. He's a very good-looking fellow, isn't he?
Yeah. The portrayal of the head will be the key to the attribution, because Use van Cleve, of course, one of those artists who's mesmerisingly good at portraits.
He has a certain personality which this artist has managed to capture as well, isn't he? And there's a wonderful sympathy in his eyes as well, which we can't quite see at the moment. It's covered in dirt and discoloured varnish.
I mean, the varnish is extremely yellow if you consider that his shirt should be sort of bright white, shouldn't it?
I think it's a relatively straightforward thing to take this varnish off, and then we reveal some nice bright colour. We hope. Yeah.
Shall I help you do this? Yeah?
No.
Oh. Good. Let's begin.
Let's do it. So we can take this off quite simply, without any peril to the picture.
It's so sympathetic, isn't it? Such an expressive face now.
It's absolutely beautiful, that drawing.
Yeah.
The dirt is easy to remove, but the real test of how well the picture will clean is the resilience of the varnish.
I can see my swab is changing to a yellow. Look at that already.
Here comes the yellow.
And here comes the original paint colour, which we have.
Wow.
Look at that blue.
It's a blue sky.
That's amazing. It's lovely.
A lovely blue sky.
It's no matter how many times I've done this, it always gives me great pleasure at this moment. It's so surprising, the difference. Look at that yellow.
That is tremendously encouraging for the rest of the picture. I mean, you would look at that sky in its current state and think it's completely knackered. It can't possibly be blue, but it's a lovely delicate blue.
And it's a lovely, lovely early colour, slightly faded.
It's extraordinary how this little hint of blue can make us both so excited for what might lie beneath the dirt and grime. A few days later, our pictures are in the scanner at art analysis and research for technical investigations with infrared and X-rays. I hope this will show us the artist's preparatory underdrawing and reveal their working techniques beneath the paint layers. But in order to make a solid case for our attribution, I need to get to know our painters a bit better. And I'm going to start with Francesco Trevisani. Here he is in a self-portrait painted around 1700.
We're fortunate to have a good biography written soon after his death by a man called Leone Pascoli. He summed Trevisani up with this rather lovely sentence. He said he was excellent, sublime, fecund, and fast. Trevisani was born in 1656 in Capodistria, which is today part of Slovenia, but then it was part of the Venetian Empire, so he trained in Venice. But in 1678, at the age of 22, he travelled to Rome.
By following this path, Francesco Trevisani gave himself a singular advantage. The two great schools of Italian painting at the time were those of Venice and Rome, and by training in one and then moving to the other, he could combine the best of both. But did he pull it off? First, let's look at his Roman inspiration in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi.
Then as now, it was possible to study much of the history of Italian art just by wandering from church to church in Rome. But arriving here as a young Venetian, Trevisani would have been schooled in the importance of colore. That is the theory that you must use colour to build up a composition and create drama within it. Trevisani had trained by studying the works of the great colourists Titian, Veronese and Tintoretto. But now, all that is about to change.
In Rome, artistic drama was created not with colour, but with light and shadow, chiaroscuro, and the greatest examples of this technique came from one extraordinary imagination, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio.
Just imagine a young artist like Trevisani standing here, eyes on stalks, amazed by it all. In terms of masterpiece per square inch, well, this is one of the holy of holies of art history.
In this chapel, Caravaggio painted 3 scenes from the life of St. Matthew to commemorate the French cardinal Matthew Conterel. In the middle is the saint getting a bit of angelic instruction while he writes his gospel. On the left is the calling of St. Matthew, with the soon-to-be disciple saying, "Who? Me?"
Faced with the challenge of creating scenes of drama in what is otherwise rather a small and poky, dark chapel, he introduces his trademark trick, the single source of light to illuminate all the action in his paintings. In this picture here, he has mimicked the light source from the actual window in the chapel. And it's that use of light which creates not only drama, but a sense of spirituality. Christ, in the right-hand corner, well, he's only half lit. And it's that movement from light to shadow which gives Christ a mystical sense. He's clearly from another world. Now, the picture which I think most impressed Trevisani was this one here, the martyrdom of St. Matthew. Like all the best Catholic saints, St. Matthew suffered a rather gruesome, violent end. And this painting is unapologetically violent. It's a swirling mass of muscles and mayhem. Now, someone schooled in the importance of colour might have thought that it's all rather dull. In fact, it's painted in various shades of brown, but that is the point. It's all about the transition from light to shadow, and that is why the muscles in the executioner look so tangible and realistic, and all the horrified faces of the onlookers look so filled with shock, with the exception, of course, of Caravaggio himself, who appears in the top left-hand corner, and he looks grimly fascinated by the murderous scene before him. The Italians call this tenebroso, which means dark and gloomy, and that necessitates a rather limited palette. When you break it down, Caravaggio's trick here is actually rather simple, but it nonetheless revolutionized art history. And it was a trick that Trevisani was determined to borrow.
Trevisani didn't just copy what he saw, though. He took the Roman tenebroso and combined it with the softer, more colourful Venetian style he'd been trained in, and began to develop his own look. We can see that very clearly in the commission that made his name in Rome, in the church of San Silvestro in Capite. This is one of the paintings in Trevisani's Crucifixion Chapel, the Flagellation of Christ, and we can see how he's been paying close attention to Caravaggio's technique. The picture is lit from one source high up to the right, and the light falling on the action highlights the muscularity of Christ's tormentors. The figure in the lower left is almost a direct quotation from Caravaggio's Assassination of St. Matthew. But look at what he does next. On the opposite wall is The Ascent to Calvary, and we can clearly see Trevisani striking out in a new direction. The key difference is the bolder use of colour. The vivid blue sky and the pink of Christ's robe draw our eye to key elements of the composition. Look at the delicate way Christ's face is painted. His pain is visible, but he is a more believable figure, and our reaction to him is characterized by the pity shown by the female figure on the left, who is reaching out to comfort him. Caravaggio would want us to be terrified by the treatment of Christ in a picture like this, but Trevisani wants to make us weep for him, and that's the key difference. It was this formulation of a colourful Caravaggesque style that made his name. And when these pictures were unveiled, he became the talk of the city. The San Silvestro pictures established Trevisani's reputation in Rome, and this new fame brought a flood of commissions. To get a better idea of how his studio dealt with the workload, I've come to see Trevisani expert Karen Wolf.
So Karen, you've been working on Trevisani for how many years?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. Quite a few years, perhaps 10 years.
When you stand in front of a great Trevisani, what are the key characteristics that spring out to you that make you think, God, this is a Trevisani and it's great?
Well, first of all, the finish of his pictures and the colorism of his pictures, and also the delicacy and elegance. This is one of his most important compositions, and you will see exactly how he builds his pictures. It's all done through color.
In this picture, the dead Christ supported by angels, the electric blue of the angel's sash and the pale pink of Christ's cloak frame his dead torso, giving the light on his flesh a divine quality. Trevisani was equally happy working on a grand scale. This complex picture is the martyrdom of the Sons of St. Felicity, another gruesome scene of violent torture. Trevisani has inserted himself as an onlooker to the mayhem. To support a busy studio, though, it was the day-to-day production of smaller devotional pictures like the Brighton Magdalene that paid the bills.
Is this something he would have had a lot of studio assistants with?
Yes, certainly. Trevisani's studio assistants had been trained to paint Trevisanis. But may I say also, any picture that Trevisani let leave his studio with his signature, he felt was his finished work.
So for each time he had a hit, so to speak, of his Penitent Magdalene, he would then do a number of subsequent versions of it with studio assistants helping him.
Just in the laying out of the canvases.
Yes, okay.
He would always make any changes.
And then he comes in, he sprinkles the Trevisani magic on it, and it goes out the door as a Trevisani, and everyone loves it.
Yeah, and they were beloved. People bought Trevisanis because they were beautiful. And today, perhaps a Magdalene or a religious subject may seem, you know, old-fashioned or whatever, not en vogue, but they're beautiful objects.
Well, Karen, he's a fascinating painter and a fascinating man. Thank you very much for telling me all about him.
While Bendor tries to work out who painted our Penitent Magdalene, I've a few questions about what she's up to in the wilderness. With so little information provided in the Gospels, was her terrible reputation justified? At the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, they have two very contrasting images of Mary that I hope will help us make sense of her story.
Mary Magdalene is characterized as both a benign and malignant figure. She's held in reverence and admiration, but also with a degree of disgust by the church. She's portrayed as a prostitute who repented her sins and was welcomed by Jesus' side.
Over time, this representation of Mary as a repentant sinner was adapted by the church to promote the idea of forgiveness. But was she as bad as she was painted? I met Dr. Joanne Anderson in front of a very different image of Mary from the early 15th century.
Joanne, who was Mary Magdalene?
Well, Emma, we don't actually really know from the Bible who she was, but from this painting we get a pretty accurate idea that she was a close follower of Christ. She's here embracing the foot of the cross and experiencing the blood dripping through her fingers. Her story comes to the fore at Christ's crucifixion and then at his resurrection. And this is an absolutely fundamental part of the Christian story about the risen Christ, and it's given, this privileged role is given to a woman.
In the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great confused matters during his Easter homily, combining several Marys into one figure and giving her some pretty negative characteristics.
One of these Marys is actually possessed by demons, 7 demons, and later that will become representative of the 7 vices. But if that wasn't bad enough, what he does is, from Luke's Gospel, he appends an unnamed female sinner who appeared in the house of the Pharisee, and this woman crawled up to Jesus, wept on his feet, shedding tears. She dried them with her hair, which is beautifully represented in this painting, and then she anointed his feet with precious oils from an alabaster jar. And it's read that this anonymous sinner, it was sins of the flesh. She was a prostitute.
Artists now had a very different image of Mary to that in the Bible. A prostitute with long hair, harking back to Eve's original sin, most famously painted in the Renaissance by Titian.
Of course, there's a bit of misogyny in there, but now she's looking more as a beacon of hope for the Christian faithful, because, you know, she fell so low, but even she was forgiven for loving the most and for weeping those tears. So suddenly now she's becoming somebody you can get behind and you can emulate as a Christian.
As Mary became more popular as an icon for sinners, her story, like a religious soap opera, continued to be embellished with new episodes. And this is where the wilderness comes in.
So this feels like much more familiar territory and far more like our picture of Mary.
Absolutely. We get a backstory here. After the crucifixion, she travels to France. She retreats to the wilderness to atone for her sins and to do penance. And so she spends 30 years in the desert, not eating or drinking.
She's looking quite hale and hearty for somebody on a 30-year fast.
Well, the reason why she's looking so plump is because, according to legend, she was sustained by the divine singing of angels. So she's radiating inner divine beauty. Of course, we'd be forgiven for thinking, oh, this is all for the male gaze. We start to see even more voluptuous-looking Magdalene, slightly, somewhat coquettish. That kind of Mary Magdalene becomes very collectible because, of course, one can get away with having a half-naked woman under the guise of religion. So you can imagine coming up to the grand tour. This particular subject matter is a mainstay of artistic workshops. So quite possibly, your painting was acquired by a young Englishman that brought it back to Britain.
So was the Brighton painting a risque treat for a young British traveller? We'll probably never know. But in 1969, Pope Paul VI finally clarified that Mary was not a sinful woman. It took the swinging 60s for justice to finally be served.
Back in Simon's studio in London, the Brighton Magdalene has come on leaps and bounds since I last saw it. The old varnish has gone, and I found Simon deep in concentration, retouching small areas of lost paint.
Hello. Hi. Bring a chair.
Oh, she looks very nice.
Since my conversation with Karen Wolfe, I'm convinced our picture came from the studio of Francesco Trevisani, but I've been fretting that it might be one of those studio works prepared by an assistant. It was reassuring to hear that the cleaning was uncovering evidence to the contrary.
There are so many areas that have been changed by the artist to the composition. So, for instance, you see there's a line along the side of the cross here where the cross has been changed shape. And actually, if you look closely here, you'll see the knuckles of this hand were higher. And it works beautifully. This is a hand of a master.
Good. Well found, sir.
There are tiny little damages on it and a few irritating cracks around the place which are a little bit too disturbing. So you can see these little white patches where there are old losses, old damages.
Right. Okay. So you need to channel your inner Trevisani.
I do.
Can I stay and watch?
Yes.
Can I be your apprentice?
Yes. As long as you don't pick up any brushes, that's fine.
For the next hour, I watched, mesmerized, as one dot after another disappeared from the canvas, and the picture started to look how I imagined it had when it left the easel of Francesco Trevisani 300 years ago.
I would never have the patience for this bit. Each tiny stroke you do, I can see what a difference it makes. It's amazing. Very nice.
We're making significant progress with our penitent Magdalene, but I'm keen to work out where it fits in Trevisani's career. His growing popularity as a painter in Rome saw him taken under the wing of one of the richest patrons in the city, and yet again, being trained in Venice gave Trevisani a decisive advantage. This colossal palace I'm walking around was home to a Venetian cardinal, Pietro Ottoboni, and it became perhaps the most concentrated nexus of cultural achievement that Rome has ever seen.
This is the palace of the papal chancellor, who was effectively the vice-pope, the man who held the purse strings to the pope's earthly dominions, the papal states. Because of the vast sums of money involved, the job had to be held by someone the pope could absolutely trust, and it was usually a member of his family. And popes didn't have children, or rather they weren't supposed to have children, so the job often went to the pope's nephew. And this happens so often, in fact, that an official position was created, the cardinal nephew. The Italian for nephew is nipote, from which we get the word nepotism.
When the 22-year-old Pietro Ottoboni was appointed cardinal nephew by his uncle Pope Alexander VIII, he set about indulging himself with his favorite things. He was a highly cultured man and found room in this vast building for his own composers, musicians and playwrights. The final piece of the cultural jigsaw was to find a painter, and naturally he chose someone from Venice.
Trevisani started working for Ottoboni in 1698, just after his crucifixion chapel had been the talk of Rome. Eventually, he moved into the top floor, where he created a studio he was to occupy for the next 40 years.
Here's Trevisani's portrait of his benefactor. He doesn't look to have great gravitas, but he was single-minded in everything he did.
He's said to have fathered 70 children, and his art collection included portraits of his mistresses in the guise of various saints, and he hung these in his bedchamber. I suspect he spent a great deal of time in confession. Anyway, his deal with Trevisani was a simple one. The artist could paint whatever he liked, but Ottoboni would get first refusal of anything that came from the studio. And I think our penitent Magdalene was part of that deal and was painted here.
While I was gallivanting around Rome looking for traces of Trevisani, Karen Wolfe visited Simon's studio. The X-ray of the painting has just arrived, and it reveals clear evidence of the significant changes Simon had seen during the cleaning.
This side of the gospel has slid off her rocky altar table. And by doing that, it of course allows a much more extensive view into the landscape, but it also leads the eye into the landscape.
Yes, which indicates it must be by him, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It would have been painted by Trevisani on a preparation of a standard Magdalene. He would have wanted to enliven this design.
And the design would have been laid in by the studio?
Beforehand, absolutely.
What we might
Based
call
on his earlier known works.
It was all sounding very promising, but now it was time to show Karen the cleaned and restored painting.
So here we are.
This is a real treat.
The grubby painting we found in the Brighton stores had been transformed by the cleaning. It had a new depth and intensity which made it much easier to comprehend its original purpose as a personal devotional picture.
Simon, I think it's brilliant what you've done and brought out all the color. The skull, the memento mori,
wonderful, yeah.
with these bright white teeth. They're almost scary, aren't they? And also, it's lovely, the silhouette of the grotto that she's in, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the leaves trickling down there. And this, putting the cross here, allows for this light also to almost brand her arm.
The restoration was clearly a success, but it was time for the all-important question.
So, when this is going to go back to Brighton, what's it going to be called?
Francesco Trevisani.
On the label?
100%.
Yeah.
It's a stunning picture. I mean, I think it must just be looked at for its beauty. It's beautifully painted. She is beautiful. The light is beautiful. And I feel it's a timeless picture, too. It makes you want to have one at home.
Yes.
Karen's confirmation that our picture was painted by Francesco Trevisani is really good news. For me personally, the experience of getting to know him better has been a treat.
For Trevisani, the gravy train hit the buffers in 1740, when his great patron, Cardinal Ottoboni, died. Trevisani was 84 and still working, but he was obliged to move out of his studio. So he found new premises across the river, where he carried on working until his own death at the grand old age of 91. And you know, after producing all those hundreds of religious paintings, I like to think that he had a swift accession to the great art studio in the sky.
Having scored a bullseye with our first Brighton picture, it was time to focus our efforts on Balthazar, the Moorish king. Could it have been painted by the Flemish master Joos van Cleve? After much testing of solvents and solutions, the original painting is starting to emerge.
Bendor. Oh, wow.
You're right.
Some progress.
A huge amount of progress.
It's a bit patchy, but it's quite a difference, isn't it?
Well, last time you saw it was just the tiny little tests that we were carrying out. But now we've extended those tests.
The face of Balthazar has suffered in the past from unsympathetic cleaning, but there is still plenty of evidence of the skill of the original artist.
It's so expressive, isn't it, that face? That is the face of someone who's admiring.
Yeah. Who is in awe.
Yeah, the birth of Christ. Wow. It's wonderful. And the light on that knee. That's masterful, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a good anatomy painter.
Excellent. Well, that's very encouraging.
And I love the colour of those tights, don't you?
Yeah, I think I'd like a pair of those.
Christmas is coming in. Yeah.
Balthazar's costume and accoutrements are all richly embellished with gold detailing, which is now starting to shine through.
So we can go down to the next layer.
Good. Next layer. Going down.
The end result is going to be fantastic.
Oh, now we're talking. Look at that. Little shimmers of gold in the dress. Very nice.
The landscape background is also very finely painted.
So now we can it's beginning to dissolve the yellow. And there it goes. Very gently comes off. It's got a very nice pattern on the surface. It's got a lot of age. It's interesting, during this cleaning, we've now exposed what was rather a muddy background into a large city with its city walls.
Lovely.
Presumably Jerusalem?
Looking very like Antwerp in about 1520.
As the cleaning progresses, Balthazar is starting to look very noble, and I'm curious to find out how he came to be portrayed as an African prince. I've come to Cambridge to see another version of the Balthazar story.
Both of our Brighton paintings show biblical characters, but neither of the paintings show events exactly as they were described in the Bible.
Like Mary Magdalene, the Gospels tell us very little about the three wise men, so it's no surprise their story has been embellished over the years. So what's the authorized version? And what's fanciful invention? King's College Chapel in Cambridge have an altarpiece by Peter Paul Rubens showing the adoration of the Magi, with the traditional image of Balthazar as an African king. I met Reverend Richard Coles to find out how the story of the wise men evolved.
The characters begin to emerge very scantily at first, but then kind of more and more stuff. There are more and more accretions around them as they begin to understand what's the story they want to tell. And one of the stories they want to tell is that the kings come as representatives of the world.
Okay.
And their endorsement is the endorsement of the Gentile world, pointing at the significance of this baby as the Son of God. So you have a king that represents Europe, a king that represents Asia, and a king that represents Africa. And that's why we have center stage at one of the key moments in the story of Jesus Christ, an African figure.
So it's kind of a part of a propaganda campaign to show the global influence of Christ.
I think it's more theological than that. What the gospel story tries to do is to explain the significance theologically. And the significance is this baby, a baby, tiny, vulnerable, born at the back end of beyond, in a very insignificant part of the Roman Empire, is nevertheless not just King of Kings, but King of the universe. And so to show that, we have real-life kings turning up, and you'll see that they fall before him.
Is it of significance that Balthazar, the African king, is here represented as being of the same status as the other two kings?
I mean, it's really significant seeing a black man absolutely at the center of the Christmas story as a high-status individual. But for lots of people, non-white people, looking at the Western art tradition and its handling of these themes, you don't very often see people who aren't white themselves. And my feeling looking at it, Rubens is much more interested in those three kings than he is in what's happening on the right-hand side.
Absolutely, that's where the real animation and life is happening. The image of the Virgin Mary is far more, it's almost like a stock image.
Exactly, yeah. Stiff and sort of idealized.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking at this painting with new eyes, so thank you.
In order to work out who painted our wise man, I'm going to meet someone who has almost single-handedly brought Joos van Cleef back into the art historical spotlight. Flemish paintings expert and author of Joos's biography, Misha Lieflang.
Misha, here he is. I've been calling him Joos van Cleef in a very English way. How should I pronounce it?
Joos van Cleef.
Joos van Cleef.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's from Antwerp, so...
He's from Antwerp.
Yeah.
He looks like a nice fellow, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, a soft face, yeah, and his eyes look very friendly.
So how long have you been studying him and his work?
Oh, almost 20 years, so it's a long time. So I need to think he's a nice man.
You need to, yes, otherwise you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. I mean, that is something I've tended to notice when he's doing his portraits. He does make his sitters look quite sympathetic. He even made Henry VIII look nice.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's very special. Also Christian II, who was a terrible king, he also painted a very sympathetic portrait of. But he's really a businessman.
Right.
He had a large workshop. He made things for everyone. Altarpieces on commission. Also a lot of portraits from the court. He did it all.
He could do it all. So we really could call him the Renaissance man, because he could...
Yes, yes.
I noticed in your book there are so many fantastic infrared photographs. Is that important in terms of deciding, you know, what makes a genuine work?
Yeah, Joos van Cleef has a very typical underdrawing. It's made of contour lines for the outlines of all the composition parts. Very detailed with a lot of hatchings. And he's also using color notations. Here's for example, a B for blue. This is an R for red.
That's amazing. Wow.
So
that would be for the studio to follow?
Yeah, it was quite easy to paint it in.
Oh, I see.
And it's also had to do with cost. So you know exactly how many pigments you needed for the painting. Because blue and red are costly pigments.
So it's not painted by numbers, it's painting by letters.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, indeed.
Armed with this primer from Misha, I'm feeling very excited about the prospects for our attribution. Our Balthazar has so many of Joos van Cleef's characteristic techniques, like the sympathetic portrayal of the face and the masterful handling of clothing and metallic objects. My next step is to have a look at a work that we can be absolutely certain is by Joos van Cleef. I've come to the stores of the National Galleries of Scotland, just outside Edinburgh, to look at an altarpiece that's similar to our panel.
Well, we're lucky to see this because actually there's very few pictures by Joos van Cleef in public ownership in Britain. And this, I think, is the best of them. It's a deposition of Christ, painted in around about 1518, 1520. Christ is being brought down from the cross and ready to be placed in the grieving arms of his mother, the Virgin Mary. Look at the tangible texture, all the folds of that blue fabric around the Virgin Mary's knees. Of course, being painted in Flanders, the home of so much European weaving and the production of fabric at the time, for an artist to be able to paint fabric like this was absolutely essential, and my goodness, can't Joos van Cleef do it.
So what can this picture tell us about who painted the Brighton Balthazar? Well, the first thing to point out is the serpentine top of the left-hand door. This shows how our tall, narrow panel would have worked as part of a folding altarpiece.
And the more I look at the picture, I have to say, the more I see very convincing links to our picture of King Balthazar. Now, I know it's rather odd to do an attribution by knees, but just have a look at the knees of this fellow down here. They're lovely legs, and they're painted with exactly the same shade of orangey red that we see in the legs of our picture of King Balthazar.
The other striking similarity is the city in the landscape behind, which has an identical castellated wall.
And it even has that rather curious rotunda-like building within the city. We've got one of those too. But above all, it's the underdrawing.
Just like our painting, this picture has suffered from over-enthusiastic cleaning in the past, and the distinctive underdrawing is visible in several places, with its characteristic hatching. We need to find the same telltale evidence in the infrared scans of our picture. It's time to head back to Simon's studio to see the final results. The treatment of the Balthazar panel is now complete, and the transformation is a testament to all the work Simon and his studio have done. The degraded varnish is gone, and Balthazar is now looking sublime, his face a rich, deep colour, and his features clearly visible once more. The dirty surface has cleaned up beautifully, revealing his vibrant scarlet stockings. It was time to show the cleaned and restored picture to Misha Lieflang. We began by looking at the infrared scans, and the drawing lines we hoped to uncover couldn't be clearer.
Underdrawing, yay! And it looks very good. It looks very characteristic of Joos van Cleef. The outlines for the hands, the hatchings, and especially in the cloth,
Yes.
it's very good. Yeah.
The underdrawing is so free and sketchy, and yet what you end up with on top is so detailed and finessed.
Yeah, he really knew what he's doing.
Yes.
It's time to get Misha's verdict on Balthazar, the Moorish king.
Oh, wow. Oh, that looks amazing.
When presented with the painting itself, it was a real pleasure to see how excited Misha was.
It's beautiful.
To see a previously unknown work by the artist she has spent so long studying.
Oh, wow. The eyes are really, really nice.
You could almost walk out of the painting there, couldn't you?
The details are beautiful. And the hairs of the beard, they're so nice.
And you see this sort of detailing in other paintings?
Yeah. But it's so special because it's a dark face and it's really detailed and softened. It's a really soft face as well.
Very sympathetic, isn't he?
Yeah, indeed.
Someone
again.
looks like a nice
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
So, Misha, what do you think? How would you attribute this painting now?
Joost van Cleven, definitely. Especially the face is so good and it's so delicate and typical painted for Joost van Cleven. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for coming to see it.
That's fantastic.
Really
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful find.
Balthazar, along with the penitent Magdalene, are now cleaned and restored and looking splendid. They're ready to go home with new confirmed attributions to the artists we'd speculated might have painted them when we first saw them several months before. In normal circumstances, a double success would mean a triumphant return to Brighton. But thanks to the coronavirus, it was a subdued gathering of curators Jenny and Alexandra and Stig, the gallery conservator, who assembled in the studio to hear what we had uncovered.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We are delighted to return 2 of your paintings to you.
So the first painting we looked at was the Mary Magdalene, and when we went through the archives, Stig, we ticked off about 10 possible names of. So clearly we've been trying to sort of nail down the artist of this one for some time. Very pleased to be able to tell you that this picture is indeed by Francesco Trevisani. Yay. We've had the endorsement from Karen Wolf, who's writing a Trevisani catalogue raisonné, so this will be in it. I think now that we've restored it and it's looking, frankly, fantastic, as good almost as the day it was painted, because it's in lovely condition.
The verdict on Balthazar was the cherry on the cake.
This painting was given to you as a work by Bernard van Orley, but we can in fact be, I think, absolutely certain that it's by Joost van Cleef, painted in about 1520. And one of the reasons we can be certain is because he had a very distinctive way of doing his underdrawing in areas like the hands and the legs and the drapery is an exact match to his rather idiosyncratic way of doing things.
In case you're wondering, the cleaning revealed that the white hands that had first caught my attention were once scarlet and are indeed meant to be gloves.
Come and have a closer look.
The news that both pictures now had the endorsements of their respective experts was warmly welcomed by Jenny Lund.
I guess I feel differently about the two because the Magdalene was a painting that was completely forgotten. We didn't know who it was attributed to. It was so dirty you couldn't see what it was. It was just hidden away in the store. And now it's a painting that suddenly come to life and that we can display, and we know the artist and we can tell a story around it. While the Joost van Cleef is, I feel like I've always found that a really beautiful and intriguing painting, and we have shown it and put it on display, but now you can see all the details in it and it's even more beautiful than it was before.